Next on Currents News, tensions are high after a gunman opened fire in an attempt to assassinate New York's finest. I'm Tim Harfman, and I'll have the story.
In a few hours, voters go to the polls in New Hampshire. The Democrats who want to be president are taking off the gloves.
Soon, these portraits will be on display at a Brooklyn church. Together, they tell the real story of immigration in the United States. I'm Emily Drooby, and that's ahead.
Plus, the guardian angels to the rescue, putting Mother Cabrini's shrine back in good shape after vandals attacked. The news starts right now. Good evening, I'm Christine Persichetti. New York City is on edge tonight after 2 assassination attempts against New York City cops. The wounded officers are recovering and a suspect is in custody. Currents News' Tim Harfman reports that Brooklyn Police Chaplain Monsignor Robert Romano believes God was watching over the police.
A thumbs up to thunderous applause. NYPD Lieutenant Jose Gautreaux walking out of Lincoln Hospital on his own this morning, less than 48 hours after being shot inside the 41st precinct. The suspect, Robert Williams, was arrested and charged with attempted murder, criminal possession of a weapon, and assault. Authorities say the 45-year-old is the same individual who shot at a patrol van Saturday night, injuring Officer Paul Straffolino. Straffolino was discharged yesterday. NYPD Chaplain Monsignor Robert Romano says this was a blessing.
They were very lucky. I believe God had something to do about it. But I think it's important for us to realize that it could have just been the exact opposite.
Tensions are high after the ambush attacks. In a tweet, Police Union President Ed Mullins declaring war against Mayor Bill de Blasio. NYPD Commissioner Dermot SHEA backing the mayor.
It's not helpful. It's not helpful to where we're going. And when you look at what the mayor does for this city, he's been extremely supportive of this NYPD.
Monsignor Romano says to move forward, there must be unity.
We really have to get back to respecting people, you know. This is madness, really.
Police say Robert Williams is considered a career criminal with a long rap sheet of violent attacks. In the Bronx, Tim Harfman, Currents News.
The violent rampage against the cops echoes other attacks on police that ended in death. Officers Wenjin Liu and Rafael Ramos were murdered in 2014. They were shot at point-blank range while sitting in their patrol car in Brooklyn. The shooter turned the gun on himself, dying by suicide. In 2017, Officer Mia Sotis Familia was inside a mobile command van in the Bronx when she was assassinated by a gunman. He was later killed in a shootout with police. 2 New York City heroes have died on the same day from 9/11 related illnesses. Firefighter Richard Jones and FDNY Lieutenant Paul Dio were sickened by their work at Ground Zero after the World Trade Center terror attacks. Now retired, both men died on Friday. 343 firefighters were killed at the Twin Towers on September 11, 2001. Since then, more than 200 other members of the department have died from diseases related to the terrorist strike. The guardian angels are being praised tonight for coming to the rescue of Mother Cabrini's shrine in Washington Heights. Vandals, believed to be from the Latin Kings gang, attacked the place dedicated to the saint. A picture of Pope Francis was ripped in half. Graffiti was scrawled on walls. The guardian angels went to work repairing the damage. The group's leader, Curtis Sliwa, says Latino street gangs are trying to intimidate immigrants, knowing Catholic shrines and churches are sanctuaries. The angels are vowing to keep the Cabrini shrine under their protection. Now for the latest on the race for the White House. On the eve of the New Hampshire primary, President Donald Trump is holding a rally in Manchester while the Democratic presidential candidates ramp up their campaigns and their attacks on one another.
We have one job in November: beat Donald Trump.
But right now, the Democratic presidential candidates need to beat each other to get the nomination. And after a strong showing in Iowa, Pete Buttigieg seems to be the target.
I get it. And he's a good guy. He's a great mayor. But guess what? He was a mayor.
Joe Biden belittling the experience of Buttigieg, who served for 8 years as mayor of South Bend, Indiana. Biden, who was once the frontrunner in the race, came in fourth in the Iowa caucus. Senator Bernie Sanders, however, was a close second and is the frontrunner here in New Hampshire. He's also taking aim at Buttigieg.
I'm running against some guys, Pete Buttigieg among others, who have raised campaign funds from over 40 billionaires. 40 billionaires. Our campaign is a very different campaign.
Buttigieg rejected that and fired back at Sanders.
I respect Senator Sanders, but when I hear this message go out that you're either for a revolution or you got to be for the status quo, that's a vision of the country that doesn't have room for most of us.
One message from Buttigieg is getting the attention of Catholic voters. The candidate doubling down on abortion, saying it should be legally permitted at any point in a pregnancy. That late-term abortions should be a decision made by a woman, not lawmakers. After Friday's debate, Senator Amy Klobuchar is drawing a crowd in the Granite State.
I am not the loudest person, but bit by bit, step by step, we have built this support for this nation.
And Senator Elizabeth Warren reminding Democrats to focus on the task at hand.
We're going to have to bring our party together in order to beat Donald Trump. And the way we do this is not by launching a bunch of attacks on each other and trying to tear each other down.
24 delegates are up for grabs in the New Hampshire primary. Meanwhile, Senator Bernie Sanders is calling for a partial recanvass of the Iowa caucus results after finishing with 2 fewer delegates than Pete Buttigieg. Buttigieg picked up 14 delegates, Sanders 12, while Senator Elizabeth Warren came away with 8 delegates, Joe Biden 6, and Senator Amy Klobuchar 1. There's bad news tonight that the deadly virus crisis is getting worse. Cases are increasing around the world and the death toll is soaring. U.S. health officials are worried that an end to the epidemic is not in sight. Whitney Wild reports from Washington.
Cases of the novel coronavirus stretch from the United States to Australia, topping 40,000 infections in 25 countries and territories and claiming the lives of at least 910 people. Despite travel restrictions, health officials worry there could be more cases in the U.S.
So right now the risk is relatively low for us, but that could change pretty quickly.
In the United States, there are 12 confirmed cases of coronavirus, 6 in California, 2 in Illinois, 1 in Arizona, 1 in Massachusetts, 1 in Washington State, and 1 in Wisconsin.
10 of them were imported cases from Wuhan, and 2 were close contact spouses.
For those working or reporting on global health, the pace of the virus calls to mind the SARS outbreak of 2003. Now, some who witnessed the spread of that deadly virus worry about a repeat due to what some see as leadership failures in China.
I fear they're too late. That everybody's dragging their feet and getting ready for this, and I think this is going to really explode.
Health officials say the virus is actually less lethal than SARS. The coronavirus death rate hovers around 2%, while SARS approached nearly 10%, killing 774 people of the more than 8,000 infected.
It's less than SARS, but it's clearly much more than a typical seasonal flu.
In Washington, Whitney Wild, Currents News.
Tonight, the U.S. is going after the Chinese military, accusing them of hacking millions of Americans. Attorney General William Barr bringing criminal charges for breaking into Equifax.
And for stealing the sensitive personal information of nearly half of all American citizens, and also Equifax's hard-earned intellectual property. This was one of the largest data breaches in history.
The hackers ripped off names, birth dates, and social security numbers from about 145 million Americans. The indictment accuses the Chinese military of an organized plot to target U.S. citizens. Pope Francis is turning to tech companies for more help in the fight against human trafficking. The Holy Father saying they have a responsibility to prevent the use of communications tools to entrap victims.
Per sanare questa piaga, perché è una vera piaga, che sfrutta I più deboli, è necessario l'impegno di tutti.
Currents News is televising a special series, Human Trafficking Exposed. Join us Thursday when survivors speak out about what Francis identifies as a crime against humanity. The Pope will be tackling another hot-button issue that's close to his heart, migrants, when he takes off on his first trip of the new year. Melissa BUTZ reports the latest from the Vatican.
The first papal overseas trip has been confirmed for 2020. It will take place on Pentecost and has a very clear mission: migrants. On May 31st, Pope Francis will visit Malta. He will also go to Gozo, one of the 21 islands making up the Maltese archipelago. It's among the places most affected by the migrant and refugee crisis. In September, Pope Francis met in the Vatican with the president of the country, George Vella. Both spoke about the crisis of migration, poverty, and the future of young people in Africa. These points were especially interesting to the Pope and will surely be a part of his agenda on the island. In addition, at the end of the week of prayer for Christian unity in January, Pope Francis referred to the welcome given to St. Paul in the Bible.
E una volta approdati a Malta sperimentano l'ospitalità degli abitanti dell'isola, la loro gentilezza, la loro umanità.
This phrase from Acts 28:2 is the motto for the trip. They showed us unusual kindness. The logo ties in as well, with hands as a sign of welcoming the neighbor, and the boat recalling the shipwreck of St. Paul in Malta. Within the last year, the island showed great prominence for the Holy See. In December, the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls exposed an impressive manger scene that combined the identity of Malta with the birth of Jesus. It's been more than 10 years since a pope has visited the small Mediterranean island. John Paul II visited in 1990, Pope Benedict XVI in 2010. And Pope Francis's schedule for his trip will be published in the next coming months. At the Vatican, Melissa BUTZ, Currents News.
There's unexpected election news tonight from Ireland. The party long associated with the Irish Republican Army is in first place after the country's national elections. The ballots that have been counted show Sinn Féin with more votes than either of the two center-right parties that have held power. The election gives Sinn Féin its largest share of parliamentary seats ever and a big role in forming a coalition government. There's a lot more news headed your way. A remarkable collection of portraits that the artist hopes will change the way people think. People are getting the news in a never-ending cycle. A Catholic Monsignor and Jewish rabbi have a warning about that. And Catholic leaders getting together to make a difference for education. Do you have a story idea or want to share a tip? Email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number 718-517-3122. We'll be right back. A Queens artist is on a mission to make a difference on how immigrants are viewed. She's using her talents to portray people who are contributing a lot to everyday life. Currents News' Emily Drooby has the story.
Betsy Ashton is changing the world, one brushstroke at a time.
I think it's time for the American people to be reminded about who today's immigrants really are.
Angered after hearing an increase in anti-immigrant rhetoric, Betsy was inspired to create these 18 paintings, portraits of immigrants, which she exhibits around the country. Betsy says together, these faces tell the real story of immigration in the United States.
The real story of the immigrants is not the gang. It's the millions of others who are the good people running away from crime, running away from political corruption, running away from all kinds of problems.
To create the series, she found inspiring stories behind everyday people, starting with Eddie, who would brew her morning coffee.
You were the first. You were the first.
He fled Brazil for the U.S. 20 years ago, escaping the violence that plagued his family's pizzeria business.
After the last robbery, right, was kind of 6 people with the guns and everything. We get so scary, we decide making plans to sell.
Eddie became a citizen in 2015, and he now owns a cafe in Williamsburg, contributing to the U.S. along with what Betsy says are over 3 million other immigrant entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much. Oh, listen, you just gave me
Perez Laxama contributes in a different way. The Catholic moved to Brooklyn to escape violence in Haiti at the age of 18. He co-founded a nonprofit, Life of Hope, which creates opportunities for young women and men.
The struggle we face also as immigrants coming here and then living in one bedroom and so on and so forth, like many immigrants face as well. So we know that if we're going to be in position today, is to make sure, like, is to give back. And then people come after us, they don't have to struggle.
Like Perez and Eddie, all of these faces showcased educate the world on the contribution of immigrants.
My hope is to promote empathy and understanding and love, brotherly love.
Artwork, but also a mission. In Long Island City, Emily Drooby, Currents News.
The portraits of immigrants will be shown in Brooklyn at Divine Mercy Parish's Green Door Gallery. It's located at 206 Skillman Avenue. The exhibit runs every weekend starting this Friday, February 14th through Sunday, March 8th, and admission is free. News about immigration and most everything else is nonstop these days, making it hard for people to figure out what's true. Recently, I spoke about this with Monsignor Guy Massie, pastor at Sacred Hearts and St. Stephen Church, and Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, president of the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, asking them how to best get through the 24-hour news cycle.
It's not about the provider, it's about the consumer. All of us have access to more information than anyone has ever had in human history. For 10,000 years, the fundamental human quest was to know things. Now you can know anything you want with the click of a mouse. The issue is how to discern wisdom from data. There's always more to the story. And if the story you're reading always affirms what you already believe, then by definition, you are not learning anything. And if you are not learning anything, you can't call yourself a smart consumer. If we were willing to consume news that way, looking for the partial truth on the other side, and asking ourselves at the end of each day, what did I learn that didn't confirm what I already believed? Whatever positions we had would be a heck of a lot smarter and a whole lot closer to the truth with a capital T.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, we were talking earlier how, you know, it's human nature. If you're a liberal, you're going to look at Fox News and other conservative news sites as fake news. However, if you are conservative, you'll look at, you know, MSNBC and other news sites.
Probably
like
the
that.
reverse.
You know,
I'm guessing most liberals are watching
right.
MSNBC
Right.
and most conservatives watching
So
Fox.
you're going to say that MSNBC is fake news if
Right.
you're conservative.
Right.
So
Right.
how important is it to listen to both sides, Monsignor?
I think it's very important to do that. I think many of us have our own biases. I don't think there is anyone who doesn't.
Right.
And I also think that when news is given, there has to be some understanding of what we're receiving. Many times the newscast, not the newscaster, the news service also has an agenda to what they are presenting and how those stories are presented. It's up to me, the consumer, to be able to say, okay, this sounds a little bit biased or things like this. Let me see if the story appears somewhere else in some other news service. That may be a whole different way of looking at that. And I think it's then me who has to say, okay, to me, this sounds more plausible than that. I also agree with the question that what you just said, that there are many sides to a story. And the way in which a story is spoken about, the way it is written, the tone, the words in it and the words not in it, what's actually said and what is left out. You have to think about this.
Now, is there a point where there's just too much information where you should just unplug?
Yes, 100%. Here's where actually I want to invoke the Sabbath. And I know Sabbath is done differently in Catholic tradition than in Jewish tradition, but there is emerging an idea in many religious traditions right now called a news fast.
Yep.
And I know that the 25 hours a week that I'm a Sabbath observant Jew, I'm a traditional rabbi, those 25 hours when there is no phone, there is no TV, there is no radio. Now, I don't care how people do it, but imagine devoting 15% of your week to those hours in which you're not consuming anyone's news, and you're focused on the people close at hand.
Well, you know something. One of my biggest envies is the Shabbat.
You can have it. Feel free.
It's Shabbat.
We will break new theological ground.
There you go.
You can have it.
Breaking news right here, right now.
Because of that, you have it. Well, I would see this as a time in my own life to say, well, just let's pull back. Silence. You need moments of silence in your day. whether your silence is going to be contemplative, whether it's just going to be shutting down.
Right.
And even you could be doing things just in silence. We don't need the radio, the television, or music on, just in silence. And I think it has a tremendous effect on your entire nervous system. And you're able to just not even think. It's when you go back to this that your head is a little bit more clearer. So what you said is true.
All right, thank you so much for joining us today, Rabbi Brad Hirschfield, president of the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, and Monsignor Guy Massie, pastor of Sacred Hearts and St. Stephen Church. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
One of the Diocese of Brooklyn's most prestigious groups celebrated an important anniversary last week with a special dinner. The Cathedral Club is now 120 years old. For more than a century, the lay organization has promoted the Catholic faith and provided scholarships to students to pursue their goals. This annual dinner helps to raise those funds in support of Catholic education. The club's president, Brian Long, says they plan to do so well into the future.
We've been around for a little while. It's based on needs and academics, and we leave it up to the principal to pick who the recipient is.
The annual dinner honored New York's Fire Commissioner Daniel Nigro and the head of the Queens Chamber of Commerce, Tom Gretsch. The Bishop of Brooklyn, Nicholas DiMarzio, also received a Lifetime Achievement Award. Still to come on Currents News, the Pope and the strong right arm of the Church. The Holy Father has a lot to say about them. It's a rare handwritten note from a great American icon discussing God and love. And before we go to break, a programming note about our special series on human trafficking. In our next and final report, a silent epidemic is brought into the light. Brave survivors raise their voices to help crush a growing crisis.
Somehow I had that courage to speak my heart.
The conclusion of our special Currents News series, Human Trafficking Exposed, this Thursday at 7. Pope Francis is praising the strong right arm of the Catholic Church, the Knights of Columbus. The Holy Father met with the board of directors for the fraternal organization earlier today, shaking hands with Supreme Knight Carl Anderson. The Knights are celebrating 100 years of charitable work in Rome. Pope Francis called that mission an important inspiration. A piece of advice on love from an American icon, the Reverend Martin Luther King, who promoted peace and love among all of mankind. This rare handwritten note by Dr. King is currently up for sale. In it, the Baptist pastor responds to someone who had asked him what he thought the meaning of love was. His answer: love is the greatest force in the universe. It is the heartbeat of the moral cosmos. He who loves is a participant in the being of God. And finally tonight, an incredible work of love from Delta Airlines employees. After 18-month-old Kenley Britton lost her daddy doll on a flight from Connecticut to Atlanta. The toy has a picture of her deployed father and plays a recording of his voice. Her mom posted a plea on Facebook for the doll's return, causing Delta employees from all over to rally together and personally escort the doll back to its rightful owner.
We were just thankful and blessed to see how everybody came together, especially on this day and age. Social media can be used for such terrible things, and everybody used it for good.
Delta even had a plan in place to remake the doll if it couldn't be found. That is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.